My God.
So I got it all set
I know that cake is If everyone wouldn't mind getting their coffee or finding a seat.
That's good. I can't imagine
I hear we're in trouble with this report today. Nancy overheard Tripp say he hasn't given a report since 10th grade. What's this?
I know, it's really good cake, isn't it? I know. We're almost there. We're almost there. We have lots of talking to do. We didn't get to say goodbye last month.
Yeah.
Okay, it's wonderful to see all of you here today. Will you join me in prayer? Heavenly Father, at times this world can become a demanding place, particularly during this busy Christmas season. We rush through the days with our eyes focused only on our next step. Help us to see the needs of those around us, be generous, compassionate, and understanding. Let Christ's love shine through each of us as we celebrate his birth, and let his healing touch reach all those who are in need this season. In Christ's name, amen. I have a letter I need to read to all of you. On behalf of the staff of First Pres, I want to apologize to you and the members of the Literature Circle for the fire drill yesterday during your meeting. This was a truly unfortunate oversight. Our maintenance director came to me first thing this morning to take full responsibility and express his sincere apology for the mistake. He also came to the discussion with additional safeguards he and our team will pursue. This was a terribly awkward situation for both the members of Literature Circle and your guest speaker. I have written Mr. Fisher to apologize and express my gratitude for his sharing his gifts with us. I hope that he might consider a return invitation for the future. As senior pastor, the buck stops with me, and I apologize for the interruption of the meeting and the embarrassment it caused. I have full confidence this will be corrected in the future. Grace and peace, Bob Fuller. I promised him I'd read that. To all of you. Okay, moving on. We have some announcements. Shelley, let's start with you.
All right. First of all, we have a few ornaments left. If anyone needs a last-minute gift idea, I have some with me today. We also have invitations on the back table for the Women of the Church Ladies' Night Out, which is planned for the last Tuesday in January. It's hard to think that far ahead right now, but please mark your calendar, and that's always a fun evening at Paloma Blanca, so I hope you will join us. And I also put together a list of possible titles for next year. I know with all the reading we need to do to prepare, it takes several months to get started. So I have a list I'm going to pass around. And I think the first 4 books are for sure for me for next year. I have other titles that I have collected. If you all have read any of these books and have an opinion, please let Grace or me know. If you have other books that you'd like to add to this list to be considered, please let either of us know. And also, if you're looking for some titles to read over the holiday break, here's a list. I would certainly appreciate any of you reading some of these and letting me know what you think. Some of them are newer writings, but a few of these books have been around, so you may have read them through the years. So anyway, I'm going to pass this around. So please take one and let me know what you think.
We all thought maybe, possibly, you'd have some quiet time once Christmas was over, and you might want to look at reading something, and these might be some good ideas. So, Jane Blackburn, I want to thank you and Shelley for our refreshments today. That red velvet was really. And Jane, would you like to say anything about what months are still open for refreshments?
Yes, Ann Smith kindly picked up January for us.
Yay.
So in the spring, April and May, if you'd like to think ahead and put your name on the hostess sheet, it would be appreciated.
Okay, it's on the back table. Mhm.
And the kitchen staff always prepares the coffee and the table. So it's just the goodie that you bring.
Very good. And if a couple of you want to work together, that's fine too.
Yes.
With whatever you're comfortable with. Thank you very much for helping out with that. We clearly enjoy our sweets. You can see that. Okay, Jane Warren, do we have anything? We doing okay?
No, we're doing.
She's our treasurer.
Thank you so much for your generosity. Please keep us in mind for your giving. We appreciate it very much.
Okay. As part of our 50th anniversary celebration this year, once again, Ellen Fraser this month, as she has done each month, is going to come and tell us some very interesting and fun things. I already have a little preview. You're going to enjoy December 1973. Come on up.
Thank you, Grace. I have really enjoyed this assignment. Looking back 50 years, what I do, so you all know, I go up to the 3rd floor to the archives and look at the bulletins, actually touch those bulletins that were typewritten, can get a feeling from it. And then I also look at the newsletter. So what I'm going to do is give you a little view, as I always do, of what the sermon titles are. So the sermon titles, remember this is December of 73. So Reverend Sabinian on December 9, an Advent letter was his sermon title. December 16, the Annunciation, that was also the annual Christmas music service and visitors Sunday. December 23rd, the 4th Sunday of Advent, I love this sermon title, The Light No Darkness Can Put Out. December 24th, Monday, 11 p.m., the Candlelight Christmas Service. December 2, Reverend William Wood spoke, and his sermon title was The Christ Who Brings a Sword. December 30, Reverend Richard G. Ryan spoke, and his sermon title was 4 rows of the Christian faith. That actually was interesting. I actually read a little bit about it. It's an intriguing sermon that Reverend Ryan gave. As far as the church, what was happening around the church, the Guthrie Chapel was renamed the Guthrie Bryant Chapel in December of '73. And that was requested by their families for it to be called the Guthrie Bryant Chapel. In the newsletter, there's a column called From the Woodpile of Reverend Wood, and he had a call for young people to join the Amigos de las Americas for 3 weeks for a rural summer 3-week retreat in Latin America. The Protestant Hour continued every day, 6:30 a.m., the Protestant Hour on WOAI, every day. The women of the church, of course, for December, lots of covered suppers. So president was Mrs. Richard B. Jackson. And Sunday, December 2 was the first covered dish supper for December. And the theme was the meaning of Advent. Sunday, December 9 at 5 o'clock were Advent Vespers and another WOC covered dish supper. And that was for tree decorating. That must have been fun. On December 16 was Visitors Sunday with a 5 p.m. open house in the Education and Youth Building. And that also had, of course, a covered dish supper. December 18 was the Morningside Manor Christmas party with the WOC gathering presents. And that's a tradition that continues till today, the Morningside Manor parties. Sunday, December 23rd at 5 o'clock was the Advent Christmas Vespers and the annual Christmas pageant and the WOC reception, and all the banners were handmade by the WOC. Just beautiful, beautiful legacy. That Sunday also, December 23rd, was Joy Gift Sunday. Now this was interesting. It's an offering for the Ministry for Compassion for the Ministerial Relief Board of Annuities and Relief. It had been in place since 1867. 1867. And this was a special offering, and that's an offering of compassion for retired ministers and lay workers. Very nice. And Monday, December 24th, a candlelight service and an interesting Christmas international house hosting that was housing and meals in the youth building through January 2. And the students were from Saudi Arabia, Iran, Republic of China, Taiwan, Japan, Germany, and India, all housed and fed here. Very interesting. And the book that was reviewed was Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Back, and Reverend Wood did the review, of course. And as far as outside FPC, our mayor was Charles Becker, the governor of Texas, Dolph Briscoe. The U.S. senators were John Tower and Lloyd Benson. Richard Nixon was our 37th president, and on December 6th, Gerald Ford was sworn in as the 40th vice president. If you've been following along all the Watergate incidents, so Gerald Ford was sworn in, 40th VP on December 6th. December 24th, Congress enacted the DC Home Rule. That was to elect their own local government, the mayor and 13-member council. So those of you who can think back 50 years and see what's happened in Washington, D.C., what's happened in 50 years because of that. So Congress did that. December 25th, you IT people might be interested in this, as I am. ARPANET crashed 50 years ago, totally crashed all across the world. All traffic was frozen through the Harvard server, totally. Those of you who are interested in outer space, the Pioneer 10 passed Jupiter as the first flyby of an outer planet. That's kind of cool. And we had the first pictures on Christmas Eve of a comet from outer space that came from Skylab 4. Now, for sports fans, O.J. Simpson, first NFL running back to achieve 2,000 yards rushing. That's December 16. December 20, any of you hockey fans, the Montreal Canadiens, Henri Richard, achieved 1,000 NHL points. That's unheard of, 1,000 at that time. And December 30, Texas Stadium NFC Championship, Minnesota Vikings beat the Cowboys, 27-10. And lastly, I always look up the songs and movies of that time. So the songs, you probably remember these. I do. Paul McCartney, Wings, Band on the Run, very cool song. And Charlie Rich, The Most Beautiful Girl in the World. I'm sure some of you remember Charlie's song. And then the movie, The Sting.
Oh.
Paul Newman and Robert Redford. So thank you again for joining me in this trip down memory lane. 50 years, all this. Thank you.
It's the chords I'm negotiating up here. Okay. Poor Tripp's gonna have to change the microphone and everything. I've got it all rearranged up here. You know, when I think of our literature circle, and I think of what makes it different than other book clubs and other such groups, besides the best members there are anywhere, of course, besides that, and the best food, why, besides all that, you know, I think it's our reviewers. I think it's the reviewers we have. We have such outstanding reviewers that come and do this and give us their thoughts. I think it's just, I think it's what separates us from book clubs that just discuss the book, because we do that too. So anyway, we're keeping with tradition today. Tripp Stuart, I think of him as a Texan. He may not have been born in Texas, but as far as I'm concerned, he's a Texan. Started out in Dallas, but luckily, for First Press at least, he ended up in San Antonio. He received his undergraduate education at Vanderbilt University, if you see any connection there. He went on to UT Southwestern Medical School back in Dallas. From there, he returned to Vanderbilt University Hospital for his residency in anesthesia. Currently, he is a civilian staff anesthesiologist at Brooks Army Medical Center. Tripp and Cheney, who is with us today, have 3 children, son Campbell, an attorney with daughter-in-law Maria in Boston, son Harrison at UT Houston, McGovern Medical School now, but also from Vanderbilt, and daughter Jennings, who attends Savannah College of Art and Design. Just to give you an idea for any of you that may not know. It's wonderful to have you here with us, Tripp, and I'm now going to turn everything over to you, and let's hear about the Vanderbilts.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for having me here. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a little bit nervous because I've got the pastor's wife and I've got Sheila over there listening to me, and I've got to really do well. I think you probably figured out why I was asked to do this review, because I went to Vanderbilt undergrad and then I did my residency at Vanderbilt. Cheney went to Vanderbilt, Harrison went to Vanderbilt, and our son Campbell was born at Vanderbilt. Don't worry, this is not going to be a PowerPoint presentation. These are just pretty pictures to look at, because I can't imagine that you actually came to hear me talk. So I brought pretty pictures to look at. And as I talk, please feel free to raise your hand and ask any questions that you want to ask. You can interrupt at any time. When Shelley asked me to do this, she did it about Vanderbilt, but she didn't know this, that I'm also descended from Dutch settlers of New Amsterdam. as the Vanderbilts were. Unfortunately, I'm not related to the Vanderbilts. Mine were the Van Vlecks, the Van Benschotens, and the Vanderdusens, and my 7th great-grandfather, Jacobus Stoutenberg, founded Hyde Park, New York, and my 9th great-grandfather, Jacobus Hendrickson Kitt, was the one that owned the farm that became Kitt's Bay, which is why they have the Kitt's Bay Show House in Manhattan. So I was thrilled to read this book. But after reading the introduction where he writes a family story, let me get the right, I got one off. So I got to the introduction and he writes, this is a family story about wealth and triumph. It becomes in some respects a story about sadness and isolation. And the depressing prologue about the breakers and the chapter about the Commodore, where I could not find one single positive statement about Commodore Vanderbilt, I put the book down for a month. And the other thing that really bugged me, and I don't know if any of you all noticed this too, my mom's a big genealogist. And there's a certain way you do family trees. This is not how you do a family tree. Did anyone have a problem with that? It was very hard for me to follow. In fact, I had to get online and get a different family tree as I read the book, because here's two, they just don't, it just doesn't follow. And they're different sizes, and anyway, it's a crazy family tree. I understood it after I read the book and after I looked at other things. So the legacy of the Vanderbilts, the author described it was 180 degrees different from what I personally experienced. I've been a grateful recipient of the Commodore's generosity at Vanderbilt University. At Blenheim Palace in England, I had seen the portrait of Consuelo Vanderbilt Spencer Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough, and the great-grandmother of the present Duke of Marlborough. In Asheville, North Carolina, I visited Biltmore, built by George Washington Vanderbilt II, the largest privately owned home in America. But in addition to that, George Washington Vanderbilt II also greatly improved the health, the medical care, the farming, and the livelihood of all those people around North Carolina. And if you go to the Biltmore today, it has huge grounds, but what you don't know is that his property went clear to the top of those mountains. And so there's a huge amount of his property that's now national and state park that he gave away. I knew that Cornelia Vanderbilt, who grew up at the Biltmore, had married into the Cecil family, descended from William Cecil, 1st Baron Burghley, who was the chief advisor and the Secretary of State to Queen Elizabeth I. And that Cornelia's descendants still run 2 large and successful family corporations, Biltmore House and Biltmore Farms. So in my view, the Vanderbilt family had achieved wonderful things and continued to have a great legacy. So this is Grand Central, and at the beginning, Anderson describes the statue of Vanderbilt at Grand Central, and that's it right there. So I thought they had done wonderful things and had a great legacy. So in our discussion, we're going to talk about the genre of the book, the author, the concept of how important point of view is to reading a book, and in closing, some lessons to be gleaned from this book about the Vanderbilts. This is a picture of the Vanderbilt family in 1874. When they're dressed to go to the opera. So what type of book is this? We know it's not fiction, so it's nonfiction. But what type exactly? It reads like a biography of sorts. We all know that biographies can be of the 3 basic types. The ideal would be historically correct, fair, and balanced. I don't know that this one is. Some biographies attempt to make a hero of the subject, including primarily the good about them. Others, for whatever reason, chronically only the negative things about a person. The thing is that once the book is published, it's the reader who gets to decide how to interpret the book. This book, I feel, is really a history or biography about the Vanderbilt family. But I prefer to look at it as a string of biographical vignettes, a sort of string of beads the author has selected out of all the beads available to tell his own particular story. A book that covered all the people that are mentioned in this particular book would be like Encyclopedia Britannica. So he picked certain vignettes to tell his story. So let's look first at our author. Here he is, age 4, with his head in his father's lap. His brother, Wyatt Vanderbilt Cooper, is sitting next to his mom, Gloria Vanderbilt. So the author. Anderson Hayes Cooper was born June 3rd, 1967 in New York City. He is 56. He's the son of Wyatt Emery Cooper, an American author, screenwriter, and actor from Quitman, Mississippi, who was the 4th husband of Gloria Vanderbilt, the artist and fashion designer. And do y'all remember what she primarily designed?
Jeans.
Jeans, good. Through his mother, Cooper is the great-great-great-grandson, 3 greats, of Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, who from 1850 to 1880 was the wealthiest man in America and probably the world during his lifetime. The Commodore himself was the great-great-great-grandson of Jan Ertsson, a farmer from the town of De Bilt, just northeast of Utrecht in the Netherlands. And so I put a map of Europe here, and you remember the Netherlands are right here. And in the Netherlands, De Bilt, here you can see Amsterdam, The Hague, Rotterdam, and here's Utrecht, and that little white dot there is De Bilt. So their name came because they were from De Bilt, so in Dutch, Vanderbilt. And he emigrated to New Amsterdam as an indentured servant in 1650. Most poor people that came to America could not afford the great amount of money that the passage required, so they came as indentured servants, and then over 8 to 10 years would work off that money. And they came to New Amsterdam, and here's a map I found of New Amsterdam, and we've all been to Manhattan, and it looks nothing like this. This is the very tip of the southern tip of Manhattan. And this is Wall Street, which is named Wall Street because that's where the wall was. So Cooper's experience with the media began quite early. He was photographed as a baby by Diane Arbus for Harper's Bazaar and was a guest on The Tonight Show with his mother at age 3. At age 9, he was a guest on the TV show To Tell the Truth, where he impersonated a character, but it wasn't him. But you know how it worked. They ask questions and try to figure out. You can kind of tell that that's him. From the age of 10 to 13, he was a Ford agency model for Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, Gimbels, and Macy's. That was a hard picture to find. His education. He was educated at the private Dalton School in Manhattan, graduating in 1984. He studied political science at Yale and interned 2 summers for the CIA. He didn't really like the CIA. He graduated from Yale in 1989 with the degree in political science and no formal education in journalism. He tried to get a job at ABC, but he couldn't get one that he liked, so he became a fact checker for a new news agency called Channel One News. He began traveling on his own after college with a video camera on his own dime, seeking out news stories in Southeast Asia. He lived in Vietnam for a year in the early 90s, and with the aid of a fake press pass, and that's the fake press pass, he became an independent news correspondent in Myanmar and Vietnam, later moving on to Somalia, Bosnia, and Rwanda. Basically anywhere bad things were happening, he went and took video and then sent it back to Channel One News and tried to get them to take it. When he finished that, he was eventually offered the position of co-anchor for Channel One News, and here he is, you can see in 1994, and that's Lisa Ling, who's a popular actress now, in him in 1994 doing the news. Since then, he's risen quite a lot in the ranks of journalism. In 1995, he became a correspondent for ABC News. In 1999, he's a co-anchor for ABC's World News Now. He co-hosted 2020 on ABC. He was, this is a show called The Mole. It was a reality show that he was the host of. He co-hosted 2020 on ABC, And it was in 2001 that he joined CNN as co-anchor with Paula Zahn, you might remember, on American Morning. He was also the CNN Weekend primetime anchor. In 2003, he was given his own news show, Anderson Cooper 360. In 2006, he was a regular host for CBS's 60 Minutes. In 2007, he signed a multi-year deal with CNN, allowing him to continue with 60 Minutes and remain one of their top news anchors for a reported $4 million a year. Since then, in addition to his anchoring duties at CNN, he has guest hosted Regis and Kathy Lee, moderated presidential debates, co-hosted CNN's New Year's Eve coverage with Andy Cohen, performed on Broadway as the narrator of How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, and has hosted Jeopardy! Right after Alan Trebek died. In 2023, now he is hosting a show called The Whole Story with Anderson Cooper on CNN. He's also a freelance author. He has authored multiple magazine articles, but he has authored 4 books. In 2006, he wrote Dispatches from the Edge, a memoir of his early journalism in Sri Lanka, Africa, Iraq, and Louisiana during the aftermath of Katrina. It topped the New York Times bestseller list on the 18th of June in 2006. And then The Rainbow Comes and Goes in 2017, he wrote with his mother, which he gleaned from emails that they frequently wrote to each other. And it was a story of love and loss, and it also did extremely well. It landed on multiple bestseller lists the year of its publication. Then he wrote this book that we are reviewing in 2021, and it made the #1 slot in the New York Times bestseller list. His next book, which just came out, is called Astor, Rise and Fall of an American Fortune. So it was Vanderbilt, Rise and Fall of an American Dynasty, and this is Astor, about the Astors, Rise and Fall of American Fortune, and it became the NPR Book of the Year. Anderson Cooper came out as gay in 2012 and fathered a child via surrogacy. It's his biological child, and I loved this picture because I totally see Gloria Vanderbilt's face in that baby. The eyes and the mouth look exactly like her. The baby's named Wyatt Morgan Cooper. Wyatt is his father's first name, if you'll remember, and Morgan was Gloria Vanderbilt's mother's name, last name. And then he had a second son on February 10th, 2022, which was also delivered by surrogacy, and his name is Sebastian Luke. And that's the 2 boys. So Anderson seems to have had a very successful life in the eyes of our culture. What shaped his attitudes about the Vanderbilt family, and why did he write about them in such a way? We each come to the world with a point of view that colors the view of the world. What is the viewpoint from which the author sees the subjects of his book? Why did he choose the vignettes he included in the book? From all accounts, his father, Wyatt Cooper's family in Mississippi, was a very happy one, and he enjoyed a wonderful relationship with his dad. But at age 10, he lost his father to complications of a myocardial infarction. At age 21, he lost his older brother that we saw in that first picture, Carter Vanderbilt Cooper, to suicide. Carter was on a new asthma inhaler and had just broken up with his girlfriend and jumped from the 14th floor window of the bedroom from their Manhattan home. He was told while he was growing up that despite the vast wealth his forebears had amassed, and this is the Breakers in Rhode Island, he was made to understand early on that there was no trust fund or Vanderbilt money he stood to inherit when he became an adult. Custody of his mother had been fought over during the trial of the century in 1934. Her mother and her father's sister, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, and that's the person who started the Whitney Museum in New York, fought in court for custody of Gloria and control of her millions. So her mother, after her father died, moved to Europe and had these string of lovers and was using the interest off of Gloria's money to finance her lifestyle. And her sister-in-law was not in favor of that, and so fought for Gloria. And eventually, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney won that lawsuit and gained control of Anderson's mother, Gloria Vanderbilt. His mother's father, Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, died at 45 of cirrhosis due to alcoholism when Gloria was only 1 year old. The Vanderbilts that the author knew and represented in his book had vast wealth, but they also had failed marriages, failed family relationships, addictions to alcoholism, gambling, horse and yacht racing, and above all, conspicuous consumption. And we must acknowledge that he successfully chronicled the failures that explained his particular relationship to them. So this is the Vanderbilt Mausoleum on Staten Island that the book talks about. And Gloria died in 2021, I believe, and she's buried on the grounds of that. But this is a church literature circle. And so I believe that there's things in this book, that this book has much to teach us about life as Christians. So I'm going to ask us a series of questions and ask myself as well. Are there things in our past that we allow to color our view of the world? Are we allowing past hurts to continue to do to us and the ones we love harm? To whom should we give those hurts when they are brought to our minds? Whose point of view ought we to have? Romans 12:2 says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect." Truman Capote, not a spiritual guide in any sense of the word. You might remember that one of the last chapters is about her glorious relationship with Truman Capote. He called his unfinished tell-all book that never came out Answered Prayers because, as he said, more tears are shed over answered prayers than unanswered ones. Which begs the question, are we praying for the right things? If we seek after and get the things of the world, will they bring us ultimate happiness? This book strongly should teach us all that they don't. Not anyone in this whole entire book was happy. What is true wealth? Is it money, houses, horses, ball gowns, yachts, cars? Who is truly rich? And who is truly poor? Was Christ born in a glittering seaside palace with platinum leaf walls, as the book described the breakers? Gloria, in her 90s, wrote to her son, "Everyone in this story wants something: money, attention, safety, security, but most of all, love. The one thing of which, no matter how privileged the surroundings, how polished the chauffeur-driven cars, or delicate the crystal sherry glasses, there still never seems to be enough of." This Christmas, instead of thinking about things, let us celebrate the loved ones around us. Let us give a hand up to those in need. Let us worship our King that came to us as a little baby in a lowly cattle stall to give us that which we truly needed more than anything else in the whole world. So I'll take any questions. Do you have any questions or any comments about the book that you'd like to talk about? I have two. It's seldom that you read, when you reach the age of 63, that you read a non-scientific book and find words you don't know what they mean. And so there were two. I hope I'm not the only one. There were two that I didn't understand. And on page 140, when he is writing about Alva Vanderbilt, the one that gave the huge party that's described, it says, initially, it feels impossible to reconcile the Alva of the Veblen-esque costume ball of 1883. I had never heard of Mr. Veblen, and I didn't know what Veblen-esque meant, but I'll tell you. Thorstein Veblen was a Norwegian sociologist, and he wrote a thesis called Theory of the Leisure Class. He lived from 1857 to 1929, so he was exactly a contemporary of all the people in the book. And he invented the terms conspicuous consumption and conspicuous leisure. So I thought that was interesting. And then, it talks about later when Alva left her husband, she went to Paris and went in and was influenced by the Haussmann-esque ways, or the Haussmann-esque Paris. And I did know who Haussmann was, but I hadn't seen it used as an adjective like that. So Haussmann was the guy. So before the 1850s, Paris was a totally medieval town with little streets and little alleys and half-timbered houses. And Haussmann was the one that worked for Emperor Napoleon III. And they constantly had fires and they couldn't get larger carriages through town. And so he's the one that oversaw the tearing down of all the medieval Paris and building the beautiful Paris with the radiating streets that we all know when we go see it. So those two words were new words to me. Then I'd like to talk a little bit, I didn't know if I'd have time to do this. I wanted to talk a little bit about Vanderbilt University. This is a picture of Kirkland Hall that I took when I was there. We saw at the beginning that statue that was Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt on the Vanderbilt campus. It was in front of this tower. His statue is right over here in this picture. So Anderson says that he gave money to a Southern school that had already been started just so that his name could be attached to it. And that is not correct. And I don't think that he lied about it. I think he just didn't do any research and he just passed down what he was told. But in 1872, the Methodist Episcopal Church of the South, which is the Southern, we split up during the Civil War, they split up during the Methodist Church split up in the Civil War, and the Southern wing of it was called the Methodist Episcopal Church of the South. And in 1872, they asked the state of Tennessee for a charter to start a university in somewhere in the Middle South. The war was just over, and they wanted a school of higher learning, and that also had a theology school. And so they got a charter for it in 1872, and it was called Central University. But it was only on paper, and it never came to any fruition. And they raised like $30,000, and they had decided at the outset that it had to be $500,000 to even think about starting. Well, if you read the book, it's interesting. You think of the Vanderbilts as a northern family, but a lot of the wives were Southerners. And so Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt's second wife was named Frank Crawford. Yes, that's a female. Her parents wanted a boy, and they decided that the name of that boy would be Frank. And when Frank came out and was a girl, they said, we'll just call her Frank. And so let that not be anything to worry about. You can still marry the richest man in the world. So which she did. And her first cousin was married to Bishop Holland N. McTeer. And he was the one that was the forerunner and the person behind this Central University. In the spring of 1873, Bishop McTeer of the Methodist Episcopal Church went to New York City for health problems. And because his wife's cousin lived in New York City, he recuperated at the Vanderbilt home. And the two girl cousins were thrilled to be together. And he talked to the Commodore and expressed his desire to start a university. And the Commodore was talked into it, probably by his wife and his wife's first cousin, and offered at first $500,000 and became very interested in it. And it was going to be, they planned to name it Vanderbilt University. So he didn't do it just to name it Vanderbilt, and he didn't take over something that had already started, because it hadn't really started. It wasn't going to start, it was going to be scrapped. And so he gave $500,000 to Vanderbilt. And the reason he said, in order that different parts of our country recently ripped apart by war may be brought together. And that he had another thing that Anderson said incorrectly in this book was that the only thing he ever gave in his life was the money to Vanderbilt. And I found out that during the war, he had built $1 million yacht that was steel, and it was just after the Merrimack, Merrimack and the Monitor, thank you, had just had their battle, and Abraham Lincoln was very worried, and he needed another ship, and he invited Vanderbilt to come to the White House, and Vanderbilt gave his ship, called the Vanderbilt, of course, that was worth $1 million to the North to use, and it was a battleship from then on. And so it kind of makes sense at the end of the war, he gave $1 million to the South, because he was from the North, his wife was from the South, one of his grandmothers was from the South. He wanted to be equal. So that's the story of the founding of Vanderbilt. This is Kirkland Hall. This is the first building and the main building that was ever built on Vanderbilt. And it's interesting to me because from here up, you can see the bricks are different colors. And so from here down, it's all Victorian Gothic. And from here up, it's Italianate. And it had a huge fire. It originally had 2 Victorian towers, where this one was, and then one on this side. And then it had a huge fire, and it burnt down. And by the time they were going to rebuild it, the styles had changed in architecture, and it wasn't Victorian Gothic anymore. It was Italianate, which they also made Victorian. And so they built the final floor that had burnt down Italianate, and decided to only have one tower and put castellation on it. And supposedly it's modeled after the town hall in Siena, Italy. So, any questions? I made it all the way through without a fire drill. Yes, sir.
So, it seems sort of tragic when we mentioned that everybody in that book was unhappy. Was there any indication that Anderson has found an escape from that and has?
That's a great question. He seems to have a very happy life. He had a boyfriend that he lived with for a long, long time, and apparently they love each other, and they separated. They're no longer romantically involved, but they are co-raising these 2 children. And the children, their last name is, I can't remember the guy's last name. It starts with an M. It's it's an Italian name, and they're gonna be M something dash Cooper. And so he's raising them together. Now, he says in the book that he was told there was no Vanderbilt money and there was no trust fund. I don't know if y'all, I'm sure you do, know about what a trust fund is. And a trust fund is not something that the media can find out about, because it's dealt by bankers and lawyers, and sometimes they're not even called the name of the family. Sometimes they have a name that doesn't bear any resemblance to the family name, and so you can't find out about those. But before she died, Gloria Vanderbilt, financial analysts thought she had $220 million. So she initially got $5 million from her father, which way back then was worth more than $220 million now, but supposedly she had $220 million. Well, officially, he only got only got $1.6 million from his mother when she died. I'd take $1.6 million from anybody that wanted to give it to me. But they think that he probably got much more than that. And then in my presentation, you heard that in 2007, which is 16 years ago, he was making $4 million a year just from one broadcast company. So I think he's doing well financially. We know he's doing well professionally because he's on every time you turn the TV on, he's on, right? And I think he does a really good job. They say that his newscasting style is a detached style. He doesn't, so often, you all are familiar with this, so often now when we turn on the news, the newscaster tells us what we're supposed to think about things instead of just what happened and thinking that we're smart enough to make up our own minds. And Anderson, look, I do give him credit for that, is more of a person that just tells it like it is and doesn't tell you what you're supposed to think and believe about it. So no one knows whether he's happy, but all indications are that he's happy. Oh, the other thing I wanted to talk about the Commodore. I have all these things about the Commodore that I'm mad about that he didn't include in the book. And I really did put it down for a month. I was like, I'm not going to read it for a while. I've got to get my head together. So his second wife, Frank Crawford, was from the South, and they went to a church. I wonder if any of you all, like me, were wondering what it was. It was called the Church of the Strangers. Do y'all remember that, where they talked about that? And I thought that's a really weird name for a church. What it was a church in New York City for Southerners. So that's why they were strangers, because the war was just over, and it was so Southerners could get together and go to church. And it was non-denominational, and the only thing you had to believe in was the Apostles' Creed. And that was the church that Frank Crawford Vanderbilt and Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt went to in New York. And he actually gave the money for that church to be built. So that's another thing he gave that didn't make its way into the book. And I saw a picture of that church. It's been torn, like many things in New York, it's been torn down since then. But he also gave that. He very obviously, before he married Frank Crawford, did not have any interest, let's say personal interest in religion. But from what I've read, Frank Crawford made it her job to work on that area in his life. And so whether we will see him in heaven or not, we don't know, but maybe she was successful. He did give money to that church, so.
So what was Anderson Cooper's feeling about his family, and did he see any redeeming value in his family he was attached to?
Well, if he did see any redeeming value, it's not between these two covers. Because I looked for it. But it's you can kind of understand where he's coming from if you're related to the richest man in the world, but you didn't get a commensurate amount of money that you expected, and if you had so their side of the family did have a lot of bad things happen to them. And like I said, his grandfather died of alcoholism. His mother's custody was fought over. His brother died of suicide. His father died young. When Gloria's father died of alcoholism, she was only 1 year old. So she didn't really know her father. So I think in my mind, I've made up a reason, which is he had his father's family, which was so normal and kind of salt of the earth from Mississippi. And then he had his mother's family that had all this money, but they had horrible lives. So I think he's fallen into some real concrete thinking, and he's assigned good to one and bad to the other. And so I think that.
And he's kind of equated his father's or his mother's side of the family as money is bad. I think he came to that conclusion.
Yeah, either money is bad or money can be bad, and look what it did to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was looking that book up, so I wanted to hear it on audio, and now I feel like I'm be able to follow it very well without that family tree. But the critique was like a 3-star, and I wondered if you think that so much negativity in the book was responsible for some low review, or was some other reasons there that you think?
Well, I was surprised that it was a New York Times bestseller, but I think the reason it was a bestseller is because the name Vanderbilt was on it. So when Shelley asked me to read it, I was like, yeah, yes, absolutely. But then when I ordered it from Amazon and it came and it said the rise and fall of an American dynasty, and I was like, well, fall? But see, to me, I have a point of view too. We all have a point of view, and like my son says, I will not apologize for my feelings. My view is positive because I've seen the good things their family has done, and I think that maybe once people read it, they didn't recommend it to their friends as much as they thought they might. That might have got it at 3 stars. The Astor book, interestingly, and nothing against Anderson Cooper, but the Astor book, he's had some suggestions that he'd lifted a lot. There was a recent other Astor book, and that author has communicated with him that he thinks that he copied his theories about the Astors and followed his points one for one in his book. I haven't read the Astor book yet.
Tripp, don't you think it's very strange, given his profession, that he didn't do a little more research on his family than he did? Like, you can read it and pick out things that you know are wrong. So he obviously didn't do any research other than
Right.
pass down through
I
the
think
family.
maybe he was so confident that what his mother told him was gospel that he went with that. I think. I don't know.
It's just
We
given
can't
his
know.
profession, I would expect by nature, he would do a little more research before writing.
But I don't mean to totally denigrate the book. There's really good things about the book, and it made me when he was talking about there's a female author, a female co-author in Anderson, so I never know which pronoun to use. But anyway, when they were talking about Alva and her big ball, he mentioned Edith Wharton books, which are, you all are familiar with Edith Wharton, a famous author who wrote about the Gilded Age in New York City. And so reading this book made me, however I went through English classes in high school, I wasn't required to read an Edith Wharton book. So now I want to see what they were referring to. But supposedly the Vanderbilt family and the Astors were were represented in her books.
I have read, and from that, very interesting. I mean, I've read books about the very incidents you were talking about in there that she wrote about, and very similar takeout on what you walk away from, although she ends on a little better note than he does.
So this is a different family tree. This is more traditional. It's only left out the wives, because if they had put all the wives, it would have been huge. And it's mainly talking about just the Vanderbilts. So right now, there are only 2 people alive that are named Vanderbilt that are descended from Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt. And you know, that isn't a real title of his, that was just a nickname because that was the highest rank in the Navy at the time. And so he ran those steamships between New York and New Jersey and between Staten Island and New York. So he was given the name Commodore when he was young, and he just kept it. So this is the man so Reginald was the guy who died of alcoholism. He's Gloria's father. His brother was the one that was on the ship that sank. What was it called? No, he wasn't on the Titanic. Anyway, I don't know if it was the Lusitania. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he was the one that was saving. That was the one good chapter in the book that said something good. That was one. That he talked about his great uncle that helped people off that ship that was shot down. But anyway, his son, and then his son is still alive, was born in 1949. And then his son, James, is in the movie business and is successful in the movie business. So these are the 2 Vanderbilts that are left from this side of the family. Did you notice who wrote the forwards to what they lifted, the quotes they lifted for the forwards to each chapter? Who it was by? It was by Amy Vanderbilt. Are you all familiar with her etiquette book? I have
Sure.
one. Well, I've always wondered, and I never figured out when I went to Vanderbilt how that was related. she's not part of this particular family, but that Cornelius's great-great-grandfather, I think Cornelius's two great-grandfathers was brother with one of her. So she's fourth cousins once removed with Gloria. And so that must be why he used quotes from her at the beginning of each
I
chapter.
think it's interesting, he had like 10 kids, and only three were sons. And he just said he discounted all the daughters.
He gave the majority of his fortunes to his kids that were going to bear the name Vanderbilt, and then he didn't take care of the daughters. So let's talk about, so here's George Washington II. He's the one that built Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina, that I showed you pictures of. He's not the son of George Washington I. See, he died when he was only 4 years old. George Washington Vanderbilt, he died when he was 4 years old. So then his brother named his youngest son George Washington II. So he had enough money to build Biltmore. Then his daughter, like I said, was Cornelia, who married that man whose last name is Cecil, that's related to the chief advisor of Queen Elizabeth I. And so I said that her two boys are, well, actually one of them has passed away and the other one's very old, but both of their families, their sons are carrying on the tradition there, so they're very, very successful. And Consuela's offspring is still the Duke of Marlborough. And then the lady that lived, well, it was very confusing that the first chapter about the family that lived in the third floor of the Breakers, because two ladies had the same name and they were 2 generations apart, and I had to reread it to figure out which one they were talking about. But the one, I think Cornelius too is the one that built the Breakers, and yeah, he's the one that built the Breakers. And one of his daughters married a Hungarian count, and so that was the people that were living. Some of their offspring were the ones that were living in the attic of the Breakers. But there's another daughter that married an English earl, and she has the Earl of Winchelsea, and the Earl of Winchelsea today is descended from the Vanderbilt. So they have a lot of descendants. They're just not named Vanderbilt. They're from the female line. So the majority of the people in the room here can feel good about that.
I just thought it was an interesting history of a family and what he did, as part of our country's history and the industry that he created, and then the characters from the family. I mean, Consuelo could have a book. She may have a book.
Yeah, I'm sure she does.
There were a lot of characters, and that's always.
I felt sorry for her that her mother just.
I know. Alva, what a character Alva was. Her mother. I think her Alva was.
Yeah, no, Alva was her mother. You're absolutely
anyway,
right.
It was just an interesting history and a big family with a lot of characters.
Yeah, it's good in the sense that it opens up a lot of questions and makes me want to read more things. So I thank you all for coming, and thank you for letting me talk about the book.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tripp. I think you really hit the nail right on the head with the takeaway for us. So, some good lessons in that. Social Graces, if you're interested in reading another book about that exact time period from the female standpoint more than the men, it's a good book. That's it for this year. Looking forward to seeing you all back next year. It is January the 9th, and we will hear Richard Taylor review Facing the Mountain, which Jim has already finished and thoroughly recommended. Really enjoyed it.
Yes, absolutely.
By Daniel James Brown. So keep that in mind too. And if you all picked up a list of books to get started on to review for Shelley, why, that would be great. And thank you all for coming. And I hope you have a wonderful holiday season. And I'll see you all next year. Thank you for coming.
Oh, yeah.